When the economic environment becomes uncertain, we provide the truth from a breadth of perspectives to help people make decisions. We not only compile and analyze the data that moves our ever-evolving economy, we carefully craft our own to provide clarity across industries, businesses, and employment markets. We identify unique opportunities to deliver asymmetric returns and focus on capturing value created during periods of higher volatility, transforming the financial landscape together. We're MacroEdge.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MacroEdge Radio. This is John Galt speaking, and we are rocking and rolling into the new year with another very special guest. Folks, this is an interesting situation as today's market was disrupted greatly by data, something we haven't seen in a while. But the truth of the matter is the bond market is driving. Before I get to our very special guest, Lawrence Lepard, I wish to just give a quick market summary. We'll just do it right before the market closed. Dow down 692 to 41,942. S&P down 89.14 to 59.30. NASDAQ down 301 to 19,177. Gold up 25.66 to 27.16. Silver up 27 cents to 31.28. WTI up 269 to 76.61. Brent up 278 to 79.70. Bitcoin recovered from the profit taking, which is, I'm going to get with our guest to talk about this in great detail, up 29.45 to 94.918. 10-year rose 9 basis points up to a 4.77% yield. The 2s10s down 3 basis points to 38 basis points. The 10s3s, the 10-3 month, up 7 basis points to 44 basis points. We're heading and steepening into a recession at light speed if we're not already there. For those of you who are familiar with FinTwit, who are familiar with Bitcoin, who are familiar with real money, I wish to introduce Lawrence Lepard to our MacroEdge team and our MacroEdge audience. Sir, welcome to MacroEdge Radio.
Hey, thanks, John. Very nice to be on your show. I appreciate it.
Well, give our listeners a quick background about yourself so they can catch up. A lot of the listeners will know just a nice little thing, and introduce your book, The Big Print, that's coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly, I've been a sound money advocate for 40 years, more passionately the last 20 since the GFC. And that meant I was a gold guy before Bitcoin existed, and now I'm a Bitcoin guy and still have a little gold left over. I've just written a book. What drove me to write the book was watching a TV political debate earlier in the calendar 24, and I watched Team Red and Team Blue, fight about all the wrong issues, and absolutely nobody was talking about the one obvious underlying issue that is causing the pain and difficulties in our society today, and that is the broken money. And I thought about it. I said, somebody's got to explain this and why and how clearly how it is broken. And people have done it. I mean, my book borrows heavily and a lot of credit to Saifedean, who probably wrote the best book ever on Austrian economics and Bitcoin, and then also to Lynn, who followed on with her book, Broken Money, and to Jeff Booth, who wrote a fabulous book on the deflation trend. And all those books are great. But what I thought to myself is, sadly, the average American doesn't even read books, but some do. But they're, the Bitcoin Standard and Broken Money are kind of tough sledding for a lot of people. And so I thought, well, maybe if I put this in the form of a story, and I kind of told my story, and I tried to keep the explanations easy and simple, I could explain to kind of the average person why they're getting screwed, because everyone knows and feels they're getting screwed. Problem is, most of them don't know why. They listen to the politicians say it's greedy corporations. Of course, that's not what it is. And explain it to them and say, this is why you're getting screwed, and then this is what you got to do to solve it. And solve it at two levels. One, solve it in terms of protect yourself, your savings, your family, etc. But also solve it because if we are able to get out of this fiat standard and go to a Bitcoin standard, the world's going to get immeasurably better across all dimensions, including wars and the military-industrial complex and income inequality, et cetera, et cetera. So that, feeling like there wasn't a book that addressed that in a way, and with my kind of, punchy anecdotes and snarky comments about the Federal Reserve, which, I don't pull any punches here. This book may not get me on CNBC, but I don't really care. I figured I'd call these guys out and say, hey, look, we're getting screwed. We know what you're doing. We know why you've done it, and we're tired of it. And we're trying to recruit, a Bitcoin army, to take over the world. And I think we will. I mean, if the book is successful, that's what it'll do. So it's a modest goal, but I took my best crack at it. So there it is.
Well, I appreciate that because I'm more of the old school gold silver kind of guy, and that's just because of my mindset. And I'm at that age. I've been acquiring since I was a kid and grew up during the '79 inflation. And a
Me
coin
too.
dealer said, "Here, buy some silver coins." And I never thought anything of it until I was able to cash it in when the Hutt brothers peaked and bought a car. And I was like, "Wow,
There you
this
go.
is great, real money." Well,
Yeah,
when
that's
you're
right.
18 years old and going into college, you don't do the most responsible things. That's just a fact of life. So, with everything that's been happening, explain to me, to quote the movie, like I am a young child or a golden retriever, how gold and silver are still pertinent, but how digital gold or Bitcoin might well be the future to offset the Fed's foolishness.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there've been fights in the past between gold and silver people and Bitcoin people, and I really encourage everybody on both sides of that fight to try and understand that we're all on the same team. We're all getting screwed by the Federal Reserve and the fact that they can print unlimited amounts of money and they debase our savings and so on and so forth. So fiat is the enemy. Let's start there. I still own a lot of gold, a lot of silver. I own a lot more Bitcoin, partly because the price of Bitcoin's gone up, but um, you know, the way I look at it, John, is I describe gold and silver as analog sound money, and Bitcoin is digital sound money, digital gold, if you will. And of course, we're moving to a digital world. And so Bitcoin is going to outperform gold massively as a result of the adoption curve and the fact that digital is more preference over analog in the future. Having said that, the nominal prices of gold and silver are not going down. They're going to go up in fiat terms because fiat's what's really failing. And so, for certain people, and I have some of the clients in my fund are quite old. I'm not young either, and they don't like the volatility of Bitcoin. I totally get that, and nobody would ever say you need to put 100% of your savings into Bitcoin, knowing that it's volatile. I think if somebody is looking for a form of sound money that's not volatile, gold's a very good choice. Is it going to perform as well as Bitcoin? Hell no, Bitcoin's going to crush it, but it's going to maintain its purchasing power as it has for 5,000 years. So and someday Bitcoin will totally demonetize gold, but that's quite a number of years out, in my opinion. I mean, there are 8 billion people on the planet who kind of intrinsically understand that gold is money, and there are far fewer understand that Bitcoin is the future money, and that shift is going to take place. But as I like to say, there are a lot of puffs in the old gold cigar still left, but Bitcoin is obviously the money of the future, in my opinion.
Cannot disagree with you, disagree with anything you said, because what happens is people get stuck in a mindset, and I'm guilty of that. I'll be the first to admit it. But you're correct in one thing that is above all else, and that is that the Federal Reserve and the central banks of the world who have worked together have created a cartel to force fiat currencies onto the masses. And if you don't have a transportable currency to offset that, which Bitcoin and digital cryptocurrencies do replace, because you and I could testify to this. You understand the concept. It's very difficult to carry 10 ounces of gold across a border.
Well, that's
It's
right.
simple to take. Yeah. Good luck with that in customs, right?
It's useful for bribing the guards, though, because
Very
the
true. Very true.
the border guards probably don't have a lightning wallet. But go ahead.
Exactly. However, with regards to carrying your Bitcoin across the border and having some functionality or another digital currency, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, it does have a universal appeal from that perspective, correct?
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, it's much easier. I mean, it's stunning to me that you can move billions, hundreds of, millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars of value with 12 words. I mean, that's just, to me, that's just kind of stunning. We've never seen anything like this. And I think one of the reasons that some of the older gold people on SAD are having a hard time getting their head around it is just that this is such an unusual event. I mean, these events don't come along very often. I mean, the Wright brothers only flew once, and then we had air flight, and the printing press got invented once, and I mean, the invention of digital scarcity will be in the history books as an incredibly important event, in my opinion. And it's been around for 15 years, 16 years now for people to look at it, but I still don't think people fully understand it. But to be fair, I mean, look at the internet. I mean, when TCP came out and TCP/IP was developed in 69, people didn't really understand what that was either. And it's taken a long time for it to get widely distributed. So, some of these innovations take a little time to get rolled out, but this one's well on the way to rolling. And as Saylor says, I think we're on the steep part of the curve right now. The next 10 years are going to be wild because we're close to the tipping point, or others have called it crossing the chasm, where it's not just a bunch of internet crazies that are using this stuff, but you've now got Larry Fink, who used to hate it, who's the CEO of the largest asset manager in the United States, saying it's digital gold. Well, that's a long way from where we were 2 or 3 years ago. You've now got approved ETFs. 2 or 3 years ago, I'd go to my friends and say, "You ought to buy this." They said, "No, the government's going to shut it down." Well, now I go to them and say, "Hey, you realize that the SEC approved it as a commodity in an ETF?" And they're like, "Yeah, okay, you got a point." So, that we sit. I just had lunch with a good friend on the subject. I mean, we sit in an amazing period of time in history, just absolutely amazing. And I think the next 5 to 10 years are just going to blow people's minds in terms of what happens with this asset and this asset class. I mean, it's like buckle up. Some people on this call, I'm sure, know my background. I was in the internet, investing in technology business, and I found the internet in 1993. I didn't even know what it was. Some guy told me about it, and I started researching it. I went to my analyst and said, "We got to find out where this internet thing is and invest in it." And then, of course, I learned it was kind of a network of computers talking to each other. And we went and we made a bunch of, and this and you could see it, right? I mean, it was like, oh my God, this is really a powerful concept. It's new, it's different, it's a powerful concept, and that's why we invested in it. And that's exactly what we got going on here. I mean, I have deja vu all over again on this thing, and the book actually talks about that a lot. I mean, one of the things that I think is very interesting, and the book mentions this, is I was trained to look at investing through the lens of cash flow and growth and multiples and all the kind of traditional Graham and Dodd stuff. And when the internet got invented, the whole set of rules changed. Metcalfe's law came into play, which says that the value increases geometrically when the users increase arithmetically. And so what you've had in 20 years, you've had 10 companies that have provided over 1,000% return. I mean, Amazon is up 9,000% since it was founded. Google's up 1,000%. Facebook's up 1,000%. These aren't the exact numbers. I'm just rounding them. But you never had. I mean, there weren't any companies that grew in value 1,000% in 20 years before the internet and before Metcalfe's law and before networking businesses. I mean, they just didn't exist. So it's like we've got to rewrite the investment books, because now you've got these networking businesses that can just increase in value so stunningly quickly. And as a result of that, and you got one left, I mean, which is the money, the underlying money, which is actually bigger than all the others, because, Amazon's just goods. I mean, money underlies everything. And so, when Saylor says it's going to 13 million, he's not wrong. I mean, the value, people are going to be blown away. In my opinion, people are going to be blown away with what happens here. And we are going to refer to the world in terms of pre-Bitcoin and post-Bitcoin, just like just like there's a pre-Christian era and an after-death era. I mean, it is that big, it is that revolutionary, and it's staring us right in the face. And I'm just stunned that more people don't get it. And I'm pounding the table trying to get more people to get it, and that's why I wrote the book, because I feel like there's so many people out there that are hurting, average Americans, average people all over the world, who get up and work honestly every day, and they're getting hurt by the system. And I want them to have a chance at understanding how they've got a way to get out of it, and that's what this is. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I figured
no, that's
I
perfect.
figured
That's what we want.
if I riffed a little bit.
Listen, when we get to the Federal Reserve, it's going to be a race between you and I grabbing the sledgehammer to pound that one into the ground.
Yeah, we can really go after that. I could talk for hours on that.
Yeah, I gave a snark warning at the beginning of the week on X, talking about my commentary on what's going to happen, and everything has happened exactly as bad as I thought it would. So we're going to move on. Yeah, I mean, this has been a disaster, but let's keep talking Bitcoin real quick. The biggest obstacle, I think, are the central banks. Is that your perception? Or, I mean, we obviously have some nations like El Salvador very forward thinking, and hopefully some other Latin American countries adopting a reserve of some type. But the old school central banks, is that the biggest obstacle to widespread adoption and use?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, that's certainly one. I mean, they're very much opposed to it. They're going to, try and fight it. Governments are opposed to it. I mean, I think actually just standard kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt is a problem. I mean, there's some monetary scholars who say it's not going to work because it doesn't have the means of exchange capability yet. And frankly, it doesn't. I mean, Lightning is very promising, but also very young, very undeveloped, and not good for big transactions. So, there are a lot of things that are quote unquote holding it back, but these things were all true in the internet too. I mean, it was originally dial-up green screen. You had to wait for your modem to connect. I mean, and then broadband came along, and then Windows came along, and then point and click. And I mean, and so these issues and technology issues are part of the hang up, and they will get solved, as we develop better systems for payments. And a lot of people say it can't be money if you can't use it for payments. I've got a point. I mean, it's right now it's a digital asset. It's not digital money per se. But yes, I mean, there will be, pushback at some government levels. I mean, we already know there has been, and frankly, if Team Blue had won, I could have seen some possibility of, taxing it, regulating it. I mean, we know what they did with Occupation Choke Point. It was just egregious what they've done. I mean, I invested in Caitlin Long's company, Custodia, and she's just been given incredible grief. And we've seen the bias in the banking system and the Federal Reserve against organizations like hers. And so, there's a part of the government that recognizes that, having the ability to print fiat is a privilege they like to have. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is important for people to get self custody. And it is important. I mean, the conspiracy theorists and they may not be wrong in the Bitcoin space say, well, if you're buying it through an ETF, you don't really own it, and they're right. The ETF owner owns it. I mean, BlackRock owns it or Fidelity owns it, and it would be a pretty simple matter for the government to call up BlackRock and Fidelity and say, cash all those people out with dollars and send us those coins, please. I mean, that's really what Roosevelt did in 1933, and he did it with respect to gold in order to do a monetary reset. So when it becomes clear to the government, and if we have the wrong people at the top of the government, and who knows, every 4 years we switch which group of wrong people we have, we could be in a situation where they come after us. They could decide they want to, they could decide all these Bitcoin owners are getting unfairly rich and they want to tax us at 90%. Now, those of us who are savvy about this, we have our own keys, and at that point in time, I'm no longer a U.S. citizen. So, there are issues, right? I mean, there are a lot of things and risks that we face, but I think the smarter ones on the other side realize they're fighting a losing battle, and that they better just join us and buy the stuff, because it's gonna, it is gonna eat the world. I mean, I'm highly confident that my grandchildren, probably my children, will be purchasing things measured in satoshis, and everyone will look at the dollar as like this ancient remnant for money. So.
Well, that brings the next question up because it's a series of questions actually, and I think this is something that's pertinent to the future. You're talking about Lightning, which is in an evolutionary stage. Obviously, it's just like the original TCP/IP. The technology takes years to perfect to functionality, but we're in a time now where things are moving in weeks and months at the most. So, with that in mind, do you foresee one of the major credit card companies finally embracing an adoption once that system is functional and saying, okay, we will put the Bitcoin emblem on our cards so you can use it for transactions? I think that will be the step that moves it from, say, 75,000 to 100,000 to 200, quarter million. And that will be the key event in the next half decade.
Very possible. Very possible. I mean, I don't know. They're a little bit in a pickle. I mean, they're kind of like, Kodak with digital film. I mean, they're making 300 basis points on every transaction. And Lightning, there's not a lot of money in Lightning transactions. So, and Jack Mallers was going to try and make all of that happen, and he's had a hard time doing it. So, while I agree with you that if it did happen, it would be a huge catalyst to what we're talking about. I don't know that. If I had to guess, I would guess the incumbents are going to miss it. That's just, I mean, if you base it on the history of, these big organizations, they just miss these things. I mean, DEC missed microcomputers, I don't know, Kodak missed digital film. I mean, all of it. I think that, Blockbuster missed, streaming video. I mean, it's, I think they're dinosaurs, and they're going to get disintermediated, in this new system. It would be my guess. But I
That
agree with you. I mean, look, the good news is the technology development is absolutely relentless. I mean, I'm involved with a fund called the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, which is a great group of guys, and we're basically looking at all the new technology all the time. It's amazing what's coming. I mean, this is going to get so much better. We're still at the early, for the older people on the call, we're still at the America Online stage. I mean, which, if anyone remembers America Online, it was a real piece of shit dial-up internet service, but it was how a lot of people originally got on the internet.
Lawrence, I met my wife on AOL.
There you go.
So now I'm really showing my age, right?
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny because I have to remember, like I did a podcast with Danny Knowles the other day. It just went up on my Twitter feed, and we were talking. And he said, I was talking about the GFC. I said, "What do you remember about the GFC?" He said, "Well, you got to remember, I was 15 years old when it happened." I was like, "Oh my God," you know. um, I mean, and I was right in the middle of it because I had a bunch of, I was running an investment fund. I was in my 40s, so it's. Some people don't. And by the way, I would just add to, that's the other reason why I felt like I had to write the book. I've seen where the bones are buried. I've watched this whole thing. I mean, I grew up in the 70s. America was a great place in the 70s. It wasn't perfect. There's a lot of problems, but there was a real middle class. And, I lived down the street from the guy who ran Ford Motor Company. He probably made 4 times what my dad made. I mean, there was an evenness to the whole place. It was just, and it was nice. And it wasn't the way it is today. It wasn't all just a big money grab. I mean, character mattered a lot, and all that stuff has changed, and I've seen it change. And everyone who's growing up today doesn't know what it used to be like, and so I wanted to kind of write the book to explain that and to show all the steps that we took along the way as to how and why it got worse. And so I felt like, and I've been there to see it, right? I mean, a 30-year-old couldn't have written my book because they haven't lived it the way I've lived it. And that's the other thing. People don't read textbooks, they read stories. So I told it, there's a lot of personal stuff in there. I mean, even including some warts, but I told it as a personal story because I thought, that's going to increase the odds that people want to read stories. I mean, that's why they watch, crap like Real Housewives. They want to hear drama. So I put drama in there. I mean, the opening of the book is pretty dramatic, as you'll see when you get it. So, yeah, it's different. I mean, I'll say that, right?
Well, I'll definitely be getting the book, and that brings into the next question. Some of the technological innovations I'm wondering which would really upset the central bankers and the banking cartel. Do you foresee the technology evolving to a point where you could do peer-to-peer transactions without a direct internet connection? I hold my phone up to yours. I transmit a currency over. We don't have to have a hard interchange, which for all honest purposes, that was the advantage of cash for centuries, as well as gold and silver. I think that would be the next step revolution, but the blockchain takes time, and so does the technology.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think you're probably right. And my guess is that, since somebody will want that, kind of bearer digital currency, somebody will create it. I mean, you've kind of got it now. I can't remember the name of it. Somebody maybe can put it in the nest or on the thread, but somebody, there is a little chip, there is a little thing you can buy. You can put a Bitcoin or a fraction of a Bitcoin on a little digital thing, and then hand that to somebody else. And then if they break there's a piece of it that you remove, and they break it and put it back in, they can get it off. So without even having the key. So it's a physical piece of Bitcoin. There's a name for this, and I just don't recall it right now. But yeah, I think I'm sure that what you are describing will be developed. And that really is one of the great beauties of this whole system, is that we should all be free to transact with each other, and it should be nobody's damn business what we've done. I mean, and that's the advantage of cash. And of course, as you notice, these totalitarian governments they're all, particularly in Europe, I mean, they've really tried to eliminate cash. Implying that if you're using cash, you're doing something illicit. Well, why do they have a right to have any view of what I'm doing with my money? It's my money. So, yeah, I think your point's a good one.
Well, I think that part of the evolution of this, as far as monitoring digital transactions and the encouragement of the quote unquote Fed digital dollar, or whatever we want to call it, whatever name the Federal Reserve wants to apply to, you and I both know what the real purpose is not only to monitor transactions, but also to do real-time taxation, which is the ultimate goal of central control and government managed economies.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. I mean, I always laugh because in theory, I've got Bitcoin that I bought very cheap. I started buying at 400, and I've spent it at shows to buy coffee or whatever off of my Lightning wallet. And somebody said, "Well, you realize you created a taxable event there," and I'm just kind of like, "Yeah, good luck, IRS. Good luck getting a hold of that." I mean, it's ridiculous. They cannot stop us, and that's the thing. I mean, everyone says, well, the government can come in and intervene. Well, the thing that's beautiful is that the technology is outrunning their efforts at control, and they're so far behind the curve. And so what we're really going to do, and what's really great, John, is that we're going to really kind of make these big sclerotic central governments irrelevant. And we're just going to they're not going to count anymore because they're not going to they don't have anything we need or want, and they're going to be able to get anything we hold. And so as a result, they're going to go away. And that's a really good thing in my view, because they're the ones who managed to murder 100 million people through wars over the last 100 years.
Do you view, as I do, China's oppressive action towards digital currencies and cryptocurrencies really was a deflationary event, in my opinion? Do you think that increasing control over personal usage of cryptocurrencies introduces the risk of deflation? And I think that's one of the risks that Europe is facing now. Right now, they're in an inflationary event because their currency is garbage. Like I said jokingly earlier, they might as well rename the euro the lira because it's heading into a very dark place in the next year. If we can sit there and develop alternative systems and currencies like gold and silver, but in a digital form, I think that really does bring the inflation threat down in the long term, but also sparks the innovation necessary to keep prices at more reasonable levels, unlike what the central banks want to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think what she says is right. That we are, um, there will be. I mean, most people on this call, I'm sure, have listened to or read Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow. And I mean, deflation is the natural state of a healthy economy. I mean, we had deflation for years and years when we were on the gold standard, and productivity increases should flow through to the people. And of course, they don't because of the way the system's set up today. But and actually, that's a big thing. Part of the book, there's a significant portion of the book that debunks, the Keynesian lies that we've been told. That we need this 2% inflation, to generate animal spirits, and that deflation is this evil risk. Excuse me, it's not.
No problem, Lawrence. No problem at all. I understand. Believe me, it's dry down here also, sir.
Sorry
Yeah,
about
we're
that.
actually having winter. Well, no problem at all. Believe me, I have the same problem. Welcome back, Lawrence. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm over in Naples, so I think we're both in Florida.
Oh, well, I'm just north of you about an hour and a half. I'm in Sarasota, so sometime we'll probably have to meet and have a cocktail somewhere.
Absolutely, anytime.
Let's take a moment here and plug everything. First, folks, macroedge.net, macroedge.net/ozone. Get your 2-week free trial. Read some of the information and data. This week's employment outlook for 2025. Well, some of us nailed it right on the head. It's a great thing. Pay attention. Lawrence Lepard's book is coming out. What's the date on that, Lawrence, if I may ask? Do you have an ETA yet?
Yeah, so it's for sale on Amazon in Kindle format right now. So you can pre-order it at $9.99. And the date there is February 14th. I will beat
Cool.
February 14th, probably by a couple of weeks. It's in layout right now. I'm due to receive the next. I've kind of got the first round of the layout, or the first part of it laid out. I'm due to receive the next part in the next 5 or 6 days. Then we go through it with a fine tooth comb. So if I had to guess, I would kind of guess it's maybe 2 weeks out, which is well in advance of February 14th. But I can't promise. I've never done a book before, and I've never done the layout of a book before. So if this is trickier or tougher than I thought, I don't want to, issue it until it's really well done. It could take into early February, but it's going to be out, soon.
Okay, no problem at all. And folks, we will be plugging this on MacroEdge. Trust me, we love alternative viewpoints. And we are going to definitely talk about the Federal Reserve because this is one of my pet peeves. And I'm sure if Lawrence has read my work, he
Yeah,
understands how I feel about him. I went to the
absolutely.
Rudy Havenstein School of Federal Abuse, Federal
Yeah,
Reserve
yeah,
Abuse.
yeah.
and
We're on the exact same page on this one. You're going to love it. I mean, in this book, I really take the gloves off. I mean, some people said I went a little too far, but I don't think I did. I think
well,
Bernanke deserves it. So,
I think Volcker deserves it.
yeah, they all do. They all do in different degrees, but yes,
exactly.
Yeah. So but I wrote it in a professional enough way that I actually hope that these guys, and if it becomes a bestseller, which it could, I don't know that it will, but I pray that it will. These guys are going to kind of be forced to read it. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, if it's something if it's really got buzz around it, it's gonna. I mean, some of the people on the other side are going to have to read it. And I got to tell you, Jay Powell's going to read this book. He is not going to like what he reads. That's for sure. So.
I think you're 100% correct. I'm going to take one question. One of the members of the audience, Doji Cat, would like to ask you a question, and then we're going to go ahead and proceed because, folks, I know you tune in for Fed bashing. I'm great at it every week. Now I've got another guest who's going to help us out. Doji, go ahead, sir.
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm not familiar with. Can you hear me?
You sound much better now. You had a little bit of the space alien to start. Go ahead, Doji.
Oh, sorry, I'm not too familiar with Lawrence, but I like what I'm hearing, and I will definitely look into his book. I did have a question, because I caught the tail end of what he was saying. Did he say he thought the government as a whole was going to just go away because of people moving over to digital currency, or did I mishear something? And if
No,
so,
I
I
mean,
just wanted him to maybe
think
elaborate a little bit on that.
I think that part of this fourth turning will be a significant decentralization, and these major government structures are going to get weakened or fail or disappear. And we're going to go to, maybe state governments or regional governments or, a restructuring of the United States federal government. I mean, the thing has been so poorly managed and is so colossally corrupt and outdated that I don't, whether it's a constitutional convention or what, there's going to be, in my opinion, this fourth turning is going to lead to really huge changes. Now, does that mean the government entirely goes away? I don't know. It kind of comes down to what we all demand. But the government in its prior form of all powerful and able to conduct war all over the world, that's not going to exist when the money fails. And my opinion is the money is going to fail.
I tend to agree with you on that, and this is a great time because that leads right into our discussion about the Federal Reserve. Now, I have a history of a Fed bashing. You have a history of Fed bashing, but let's take it into what happened today. Today, we got a number which stunned the markets. Some of us were not stunned based on the history. In my opinion, the biggest problem we're facing in 2025 is the realization of the poor quality of the bureaucracy and the data they produce, which provides, it goes right back to your discussion of technology originally, bad input, bad output. Well, we've been suffering from bad output and bad input for going on 30 years now, attempting to manipulate credit, equity, etc., to a point to provide the illusion that the fiat money system was working, when in reality, it's nothing but a nonstop escalator of inflation from one inflationary event to another. Will, in your opinion, not only gold, silver become more relevant, but digital currency help to offset this inflationary outburst, or will it take more, in your opinion?
Well, no, I think that what'll happen is that the bond market will fail, and that they will then print more money, what I call the big print, thereby the title of the book, and the inflation will get worse, perhaps catastrophically so, and headed towards hyperinflation, and we will have total currency failure. Or if they're smart about it, there'll be some kind of a reset to a sound money standard based on a combination of gold or Bitcoin, or either all one or all the other. And we'll get things stabilized. But I think the fact of the matter is, it's pretty clear to me that we are going to have a currency event, and that's what this fourth turning is all about. That the Keynesian model is wrong, it's broken, and it's coming to an end. I have a friend, Craig Hemke, who runs a site on. Some of you guys probably know him. He calls himself Turd Ferguson on Twitter, but he says the end of the great Keynesian experiment is approaching. Are you ready? And that's kind of what I think is going on here. Keynesianism is going to die, and because fiat money is going to die, just as Voltaire said it always will. So the currency is going to be something else. It's going to have to be something else, because they're not going to be able, if the dollar fails, they're not going to be able to say, well, let's create $1 and trust us, it's going to be better than the first one. I mean, that's just not going to happen. People are going to say, we don't trust you. We want things that we know you can't print. You can't print gold. You can't print silver. You can't print Bitcoin. So those, we're going to keep our savings in those things. So
I'm going to follow up on this, because I'm going to challenge you with a question, because one of my theories of what's going to happen as the Federal Reserve loses control domestically of the currency is that we're going to see a bifurcation. And for people who are not silver nuts like Lawrence or myself, we had a trade dollar at one time in America. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yep, I do.
And most people don't understand that the trade dollar was only for overseas use. And that is something that I could foresee a bifurcation of the currency, where the American public using the fiat currency is forced to use a devalued dollar versus a digital, finger quote, central bank currency. And that is going to create more problems and the hyperinflation you're talking about. I'd like your take on that, sir.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that this problem that we have, this currency problem that we have, it's universal to the entire world. I mean, we're not the only fiat currency. In fact, the whole world is operated on fiat currencies. We just happen to have the biggest one. I mean, and it's arguable that Japan will go first in terms of currency failure. The euro certainly has potential to go. And this is why we see central banks around the world buying gold. And we also see sovereign nations. I mean, this is interesting. I came back from a conference in the UAE in early December, and the buzz there was that there are three entities in the Middle East, sovereign nations, UAE, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, are all stacking at a governmental level, are all stacking Bitcoin, recognizing it as a form of digital gold. And Bhutan has started to do it. El Salvador has started to do it. The Finnish have done a little bit of it. I mean, you're getting, one of the things that's interesting about what's going on in the Bitcoin world is that you're starting to get into a situation where nation states are starting to recognize that it's sound money. And one of the things I will say is, in the last 5 years, all these monetary issues have gotten more and more acute as a result of COVID and other things. And what you've seen also in the last 5 years, many nations around the world have their central banks have been big buyers of gold, much bigger than they ever were. And so what that tells me is those nations realize that there's a monetary problem developing, and their solution to it is to buy gold. And that makes sense. But what you're also seeing is that some forward-thinking nations, particularly these three countries in the Middle East, are seeing the same set of problems, and they have a lot of gold. The Middle East has always been a big investor in gold, but they're thinking, hey, you know what? We should get some Bitcoin because it's digital gold. So, I mean, what you're describing is known by the entire world, in my opinion, and that's, you can watch these clues, and these inform you about where the smart money is going over longer periods of time. And one thing I would emphasize is, I'm thinking in 5 years. I'm not thinking in 6 months. I mean, Bitcoin's volatile. It could go from 100 down to 50. It could go from 100 to 200. Who knows? But that's not what I really care about. What I care about is, I think in 5 years it's going to be at 500,000 or 1 million. So, and other people see the same thing, and nations are starting to see the same thing.
Well, we have another individual who'd like to ask you a question. His name is Raju. Raju, you're up, sir.
Hey, thank you so much for bringing me up. So I wrote a physics framework around money and Bitcoin, and I got a seal of approval from Adam Back. So If people are
Nice.
interested,
I
yeah,
think
if
I
people
think
are,
Adam might be Satoshi, but that's just my personal view.
yeah, and I think you can argue why Bitcoin is inevitable from a physics point of view, um, from a like first principles approach, uh,
It
and
make
I
it makes sense. I mean, it's
yeah,
yeah. I don't disagree with that.
yeah. Um, there's a pull towards capital the same way there's a pull uh, like for an object that's not at rest.
Oh,
Gravity
interesting.
pulls the rock down, uh,
Interesting.
and the same thing is applicable to Bitcoin. It's just that it's happening through where when something is falling, when a rock is falling like through the air, but in
Mhm.
this case the medium is like the fabric of humanity.
Right.
And as it's falling, it's creating friction, and that friction is generating work, like the same way a rock falling down would generate work. And the work is like the work everyone has to do to like rock Bitcoin and uh, adopt Bitcoin on both like a personal level and institutional level and government level. So
I think it's a good thought pattern, and I agree with that. And that's a good metaphor for it. I think the other metaphor that's interesting that I always liked a lot is Saifedean's metaphor, which is that Bitcoin is like gunpowder, and fiat is like fighting with swords and spears. And when gunpowder arrived, swords and spears didn't work anymore. And this
yeah,
is this. I mean, it is the soundest. It's such a unique thing. It is the soundest form of money that's ever existed in the history of humankind. It's
yeah.
inelastic. There's a fixed supply, and as a result of that, I mean that's. I just
So
don't. I don't think the average person or the world has come to fully understand what that means. It's a really big deal.
yeah, so I think I agree with that, but I think that's just one half of the story. I think the other half is the Bitcoin network,
Hmm.
because gold, for example, is like a static asset that does nothing. It exists in like a state of equilibrium. It doesn't have energy flow through it. But the Bitcoin network incentivizes energy flow, like it exists in a state of uh, thermodynamic non-equilibrium, and that's called a dissipative structure.
Hmm.
And um, the only self-scaling dissipative structure other than Bitcoin is life itself. So in a way, it is a form of life that we created, um, and it's
Wow.
working towards like maximizing entropy in the universe by localizing entropy, reducing entropy locally, and then externalizing entropy in the universe. So I think that's the other half of Bitcoin that a lot of people miss.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a very good point.
Thank you, Radu. Appreciate you jumping on there, folks. We're going to be polite to our guest time because we want to promote his book, The Big Print. We want to promote the ideas. We're going to go back to talking about the Federal Reserve real quick because the errors and devolution from the 1920s to where we are now is something out there that I really didn't think they would make the mistakes at such an accelerated pace. Do you believe, as I do, that they've decided to develop their own superiority complex over financial markets and thus no longer abide by the original intent from the 1913 disaster?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they continually kind of rewrite the rules in their own favor, and it's been a series of steps and building blocks. I mean, 1913 was the original one. The big ones are then Roosevelt grabbed the gold, and then of course 71 was an earthquake. But and then they started the bailouts, and this is all in the book. And then of course they blew the dot-com bubble, and then I mean Greenspan changed the Fed because he well, there were political guys before him, but Greenspan changed during the 70s. He changed the Fed because he started seeing the stock market as a metric to manage. So, he started realizing that if he realized if he gave people free money or cheaper money, it would make the stock market go up. So really what the Fed has become is kind of a tool for the elitists and the government to manage the economy in a way that benefits them because they're able to get money cheaper and earlier than the rest of us, and that's really the inherent unfairness in the system. And the book delves into this in great detail with a lot of good examples. And so, it continues on and on and on, and they continually rewrite the rules. I mean, whenever they want to, they change the rules in their favor. I mean, Silicon Valley Bank, for example, got bailed out They didn't call it a bailout; they put a different name on it. They said, "Well, we're lending to these banks," but it was really a bailout. And it was they did. I mean, so 2008 there were bailouts, right, in the GFC, and they passed a law called Dodd-Frank. And one of the parts of the law, the most important part of that law was that there will be no further bailouts of banks. We're never going to do this again. Okay, and then in fact, when Silicon Valley Bank blew up, they did it again. Slightly different, language in the way they did it, but it was just, they just changed the words. I mean, they effectively bailed out Silicon Valley Bank because they provided a guarantee to all the investors or depositors. So they just continually keep writing the rules in favor of those in power, those who are politicians, those who have access to the money, etc. I mean, and I've got some great stories in the book about this. I mean, things that younger guys won't remember, but the things that happened in the GFC. I mean, about the corruption. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so, this is not America. This is not fair. This is not democratic. I mean, everyone is not created equal. I mean, this is why we have 1% of the country owning 92% of the wealth. That's why the middle class doesn't exist anymore, because these guys at the top have just raked it all off. This is why, you go to have something done on your dog, and the vet's no longer your friendly local vet. He's some guy who works for a private equity firm who's bought the vet chain, and they convince you that, your dog, you got to do thousands of dollars worth of work on your dog, or your dog's going to die. I had that happen to me recently, and it's just,
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, well, I mean, the dog did die, but after I'd spent thousands of dollars, I probably shouldn't have spent, because sadly the dog was doomed. but they managed to get me to think it wasn't doomed if I spent all this money, and I did. But but that's the kind of thing that's going on. I mean, it's a totally broken system, from top to bottom, and that's why we're all hurting so bad. But it doesn't have to be this way. It's we return to sound money, and it's going to fix itself. I mean, nature will heal it. So again, the point of the book. I mean, first half is how the problem. The second half of the book is the solution, and the solution is to return to sound money. And I think we will, because people will eventually the pain will become so large that they'll realize we've got to do it. Everyone will realize that and vote for people who are going to do it.
Well, that brings up the question, because I'm going to go back to some history, because you and I both have the same opinions, and I have been a constant Volcker basher. Everyone paints him as a hero, but most people don't realize that he, as Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Monetary Affairs, was the one who persuaded Nixon to come off of the gold standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he brags about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
well, and it's even better than that. And I talk about this in the book. He talked about how the one mistake they made in the 70s wasn't manipulating the gold price more. Isn't that amazing? I mean, he talks about how they did not manipulate the gold price, which basically says they were manipulating it. They just didn't do it enough. But yes, you're right. And that's a great, the book 3 Days in August is a really fabulous book, which I read in connection with writing my book. And what Nixon did was wrong. He should have let gold float, and it would have been inflationary. But that's okay. Having a neutral reserve currency and having gold tell the world when politicians were overspending was a good thing. But basically, they decided, no, this is an easier way out. Let's just get rid of that that canary in the coal mine, gold, and since then they've suppressed it massively. So and he's a hero.
He's a villain. Yes, that's where I was going to go. When he cut rates in 1980, the first thing I thought of what Jay Powell did this year. And most people don't realize this. And if you're new from the Bitcoin community, it's one of my rants. It's on my blog. You can access it through my username on X, etc. Was that Volcker's cuts were political to try and keep Carter in office, because he had the mindset that Reagan was a cowboy and a wild card, sort of how Trump is perceived. In reality, what that did was reignite inflation in 1980, going into 81, and triggered the reaction that he had to impose by destroying the U.S. economy with outrageous interest rates on fiat currencies.
Yeah, when you put them up to 20%, it almost bankrupted my father. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, when you have a group of people that can set the interest rate at 20% or the interest rate at 0%, I mean, it's absurd. I mean, the interest rate is the price of money, and it's meant to be set at the point at which, savings balance investments. So people have savings, great, and they want to earn a return on them, great. People have needs for investments. They want to offer an investment that offers a return, fine. So they borrow from people who have savings. And the rate at which they borrow is meant to be the interest rate. It's set by supply and demand. Or that's what it should be. That's classical economic theory. But of course, that's not what's happened. We've got this Federal Reserve that thinks they're better than the market, which is enormous arrogance on their part, and thinks that they can micromanage the economy in a more positive way. And the fact is, they can micromanage the economy in a more positive way for the bankers and the elites and the people at the top. But the rest of us pay for that in terms of higher gas prices and higher food prices. And so we've had this very sophisticated fraud that's been going on for 100 plus years since the Fed was formed, and the people, these rich people, have gotten away with it. And we've just gotta kill the Fed. I mean, Ron Paul had this right. We have got to end the Fed. Period. There is no place for a central bank which backstops banks. That's the other thing. We got to take away the backstopping of the banks. We got to take away the FDIC. If we do that, responsible banks will emerge. People who say, "Hey, I hold 50% in reserve. I don't do crazy, stupid shit. You should put your money with me." And those banks will survive. And if banks do crazy, stupid shit, they should go bankrupt. So, but instead, what we've done is we've socialized banking, which more or less makes bankers rich, even if they do stupid shit. And of course, that stupid shit we all pay for in the form of higher gasoline and food prices. So, there's logic behind the system that I'm talking about, and it's not that tough to understand. But you have to have it pointed out to you how they've conned us with this system they've got. And as you know, John, they really have conned us. I mean, it's been, and there's a lot in the book about that. I mean, all the stuff they've done to bribe the economics profession. I mean, there's, all the secrecy that they maintain, the way they treated Ron Paul, the way they treated Judy Shelton when Trump nominated her to be a Fed member, and they had 130 economists come out and say she was dangerous. She was dangerous because she believed in sound money and the gold standard. I mean, really? The gold standard got us from 1789 to 1946, when we were the leading country in the world, having won World War II. It was all on the gold standard. So what was so bad about that? But modern Keynesians have painted the gold standard as the most evil thing in the world. I mean, led by Bernanke, who's a current day John Law. The guy's a piece of shit. I mean, I lived for the day when Bernanke is reviled in this country, and I think he will be in the next 10 years as this currency system that he proposed fails.
Well, I'm afraid Bernanke, everybody who reviles Bernanke is going to have to get in line behind me, because I've been ranting about this SOB, pardon my French, folks, since 2006, when he said, well, Greenspan knew what he was doing, so I'm just going to keep adopting his policies. And if you saw what happened in 2007, people lost everything speculating on his statements and his fiat currency creation, and failure to understand that part of the responsibility of a Federal Reserve president and the Federal Reserve is to supervise the banking system. That what you were talking about a minute ago, which is exactly where I was going to go next, is why the banks are actually considering, the Federal Reserve and the OCC and others, looking at giving private equity authorization to access and borrow against retirees' accounts, 401ks,
Oh,
money market
jeez.
funds, etc.
Yeah.
My God, is that the ultimate insanity as we head into this year?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like they just continue to invent new ways to loot the common man. I mean, it's so incredibly sad that they're, I mean, look at all these people who worked their entire life for a pension in a company, and then the company got bought by a private equity firm. Then the private equity firm levered the company up, paid out a big dividend where they made a ton of profit. Then the company went bankrupt and the pension went away after somebody spent 30 years working there. I mean, how these people don't end up in jail, it's beyond me. I mean, they don't, because the system is what it is, and they control it, and they've got it rigged. No court would hear that case. But my point is, we've just all been getting screwed and tattooed for fucking 100 years, and far too few people understand it. And until recently, we didn't have that great a way to fight back, because we could fight back with gold, but they can manipulate it and suppress and blah blah blah. But Bitcoin is a really sharp spear, and we're gonna, they got a problem, and that's a beautiful thing. And we're gonna fight back, and their system, and they've run it too hard and for too long, and their system is gonna fail. I mean, I believe that with every bone in my body. It's gonna fail in the next 5 to 10 years. Their system is gonna completely fail, And that's going to be really, really good for the world and for everybody. And if we want to accelerate that, we can, buy my book, give it to friends, get them to do it, and then buy Bitcoin. I mean, the way to make their system fail is to make the alternative system succeed. And so if it becomes clear that the Bitcoin is a much better form of money than their money, we'll stop using their money. We'll be using our money. They won't have any money. We'll be the winners, and we'll get to write the rules, right? So that's in a nutshell kind of the idea here.
That sounds perfect. And definitely we'll meet you at Sanibel Island sometimes, or Marco, because we should have a beer at some point. I'm just telling you that, folks, so
happy to do
open
it.
and honest.
I'm not going to have a beer.
He and I,
I'm not going to have a beer with you.
whatever you want.
I don't drink alcohol. I haven't drank for 35 years, but I'd be happy to have a coffee with you.
No problem. Well, that's fine too. That's fine too. So we're going to hit, usually it's tradition. Welcome to our program, and we definitely will have you on again. Part of the MacroEdge Radio tradition is I always try to ask a few hard questions. I'm going to ask the simple one first, and then I'll hit you with a tougher one in a minute. What do you think a proper allocation of hard assets, be they digital, gold, silver, should people start looking at as we head into a potentially another stagflationary period in 2025? Just a ballpark.
Yeah,
nothing recommended hard.
Yeah, well, look, you should always have some cash and have, it depends. Everyone's situation is so different, and this isn't investment advice. I mean, I can tell you that of my investable assets, like 80 or 90% of it's in this hard stuff. I've got a little bit of cash, and I've got some real estate that I own, and that's in a way hard, although the problem with real estate is they can tax it, and you can't move it. In the book, I say that any investor who doesn't have at least 25% of their assets in these hard monies is going to regret it severely. That gold, silver, Bitcoin, if you don't have 25% there, you're not thinking correctly, in my view. I would argue for much higher numbers, given that we're about to enter a sovereign debt crisis, and I think we're going to have a currency crisis. But I understand there are people who want to own stocks and bonds and other things and real estate. I mean, look, real estate, at least real estate they can't print. So, they can tax it, but they can't print it. So, the biggest losers here are going to be bondholders. I just can't imagine why anyone wants to hold a bond of all these countries that are going to print tons of money and we're going to have a lot of inflation. So, but the percentage, I think it comes down to, everybody's personal preference. I mean, if you're older, Bitcoin's volatile, gold has some volatility. I mean, one could argue, I know people who have a lot of money and, they own 30-day T-bills and get 4% and they roll them over, and that's okay. I mean, you're going to get your principal back. I mean, every year you're getting diluted by 9% inflation. That's what real inflation is, even though they say it's 3%. But, you don't lose money with a T-bill, right? I mean, whereas you can lose money in stocks, in the short run, you can lose money in gold or Bitcoin if there's a correction. So everyone has to kind of make their own decisions on what risk level they want to take,
Well, now the next big question: are there other cryptocurrencies which might evolve in parallel with Bitcoin heading into the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask me that a lot, and I tend to be more on the Bitcoin maxi side. In terms of store of value, it's very clear to me that Bitcoin has won massively, and because of the Metcalfe's law, the network effect, the size of it, etc. I don't think it's going to be supplanted in the quote unquote store of value. It's digital gold, and it's going to continue to appreciate in value. There's a scrum going on for what I call layer 2, medium of exchange currencies. I don't participate in any of these, but I know people who do, and as long as they're done, as long as it's ethical, they're not pump and dump schemes. There's an argument that says that there'll be another coin that'll come along that'll have value as in transactions. I mean, look, it's getting the average Bitcoin transaction is getting to the point where it costs $3 or $4 or $5. I mean, you can't buy coffee with Bitcoin. I mean, you can on a Lightning Network, but you wouldn't do an on-chain transaction, to buy coffee because the transaction cost would be too high. So, it's possible that there will be some other coins that emerge and have real use cases. I don't think any of them will have as strong a monetary policy as Bitcoin. But in turn, if you're not holding the money, if you're using it for transactions, you're not holding it for long periods of time, you don't care so much about that. So I'm not opposed to these other things. And I know people who speculate in them and try to make money to grow their Bitcoin stack. I don't recommend that, but people can do whatever they want to do. And I think Lightning will most likely emerge as the layer 2 for payments, but I can't be sure of that. I mean, it's entirely possible that some other coin will come along and will be the the payment coin. But I think most people in their heads, they divide their money up into two buckets. There's the I'm saving this and I want it to grow in value bucket, which is a store of value, and then there's the I need this so I can pay some bills in the future, and that's the medium of exchange bucket. And I think on the store of value bucket, it's Bitcoin all the way. It's one. It's going to go much, much higher. It's just a no-brainer to be there. I think if you want to, if you want to be in the medium of exchange bucket and use some other coins because they're convenient, whatever that and something else may emerge. But the other thing is with digital cryptocurrencies, it's going to be really easy to transfer from one to the other. I mean, I know people now who more or less have all their money in Bitcoin. Whenever they have to pay a bill, they just transfer a little over and convert it into dollars and pay the bill. So that's going to be very doable.
Fantastic, sir. Thank you so much for answering that question. Sir, please take a moment, promote your writings, your website, and your book one more time so everybody knows they can get it now, please.
You can get it now if you go. It's pretty funny. If you go to Amazon and you Google "The Big Print" Lepard, Lepard, it might find my book. It might also find leopard prints because it thinks you misspelled leopard. But yeah, so it's there. It's called The Big Print, and if you go to my thread on Twitter, you can find it there. I just did a pod with Danny Knowles, and right after it, you can see the title, the table of contents, and then there's a link to how you could pre-order it if you want to pre-order it Kindle. In fact, I would ask this: if you're interested and want to support the cause, it's $9.99. Please order it, pre-order. If you don't want a Kindle, fine. Before I issue it, in 2 weeks or something, I will put out a tweet that says everything's about to come out. Feel free to cancel your Kindle order if you want to buy a paper copy of the book instead. But if I've gotten, I don't know, I think I've gotten a fair number of Kindle orders, like 500 in a few days. If I get the Kindle order book up large enough, then it hits the Amazon algorithms, which mean they promote it more and it gets found more easily, and blah 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 blah. And so we're trying to create a movement here. Everybody who contributes, and then if you get it and you like it, I mean, I would ask, please, 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 give it 5 stars and a positive review, because if we really want to change the world, we got to get a lot of people believing and understanding sound money and moving in this direction. And I think this book is a good tool to do that. I think when you read it, you'll conclude that I'm correct. I know Max Kaiser, who's a big Bitcoin guy, a real OG in Bitcoin, agrees with that, and he tweeted about that. And so he actually wrote the foreword for the book, by the way. So, I think that anything you can do to support it. I mean, obviously there's money in it for me. It's surprising. It's not that much. I mean, Amazon, Kindle, all these guys rake off a ton amount, and that's really not what I care about. What I care about, I want to change the world. I want to get this book out there. I want to sell a lot of them. I want people to pass them along, and I want to just get as many of them out there as we possibly can.
Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us today on MacroEdge Radio. Folks, macroedge.net/ozone. Get your 2-week free trial. Read macroeconomic and other perspectives, including stock market perspectives. We try to present guests like Lawrence, as many as possible, every Friday night. And as we proceed, you're going to start hearing people like Anna Wong, etc. Cantor is going to come and join us. We have a list of folks like Lawrence, etc., coming up, and we shall sit there every week and present alternative opinions and viewpoints based on facts, based on the economy, and based on reality. For MacroEdgeRadio.net /Ozone, this is John Galt speaking. Have a great weekend. See you next week.